Hello, welcome to a special Geotech Hour as we close 2020 with a look towards technology, policy, and leadership in the next year ahead. We're joined by a very special guest, the Assistant Secretary for the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition, James Hondo Gertz. Welcome to the show, Hondo. We're really glad to have you here and really appreciative that you allow us to use your call sign with you joining us here for this discussion. Welcome.
Awesome, David. Good to be with you. Good to connect here with everybody. And yeah, it's been a wild and crazy year behind us and an important year coming ahead of us. So I appreciate a chance to get together and talk with you.
Really glad to have you here. And in particular, in your role and actually roles you've had in the past as well, you've led in a variety of challenging environments, leading during times of stress, turbulence, and delivering results under pressure. So as an initial opening, could you share with us your takeaways for leaders of all types for how you lead in such dynamic, changing environments?
Yeah, I would say a constant, a little bit of a labor of love and, constantly learning, and maybe a couple thoughts, for those I haven't met out there, spent a lot of time in the Air Force during the Desert Storm kind of days, and then a lot of time at SOCOM during all the Middle East activities, and now with the Navy and everything we're doing there. So there's constant opportunities and stresses. A couple things as a leader, you've got to focus on what do you value, and make sure you're constantly both checking yourself and checking your behaviors on what do you value. And I found, obviously valuing people is really important. Valuing diverse sets of input is really important. If you create an organization where folks don't feel safe, don't feel like telling you what they think you don't want to hear, or if an environment where they don't believe they can bring their unique strengths to the table, you're going to create blind spots. I value velocity, right? So that's speed in the right direction. A lot of folks talk about speed, but not velocity. You can do harm by going fast if you're going in the wrong direction. Right. And then value on output. We all tend to get a little bit input focused. How much money do I have? How many people do I have? How many tasks do I have? Those things. A little less on output. And when you start looking at output, then that I think creates some opportunities for you. And then I would say the last thing, and I've had to continually relearn this, is really value where you spend your time. I'm a program manager. There's nothing I love doing more than solving a program problem, trying to figure out what's going on in execution or something. And if you're not careful, you can get dragged down in the organization, and then you're not doing the things only you can do if you're the CEO or if you're in a particular position. And so when you start getting in the work as a leader, as opposed to shaping the work, then that really can kind of hamper your thing. So, that's kind of, I would say, leadership 101, particularly in crises. Keep it simple. And I'm a kind of simple guy. I use a phrase, 1 + 2 = 3. One is yourself. So if you're not keeping yourself healthy, whether that's mentally, spiritually, physically, then you're not going to be there for your team. And so if 1 is yourself, 2 is your team, what are you doing for your team? Or making sure they're resilient, making sure they're healthy, making sure they're inspired, making sure they're valued. If you can get 1 and 2 right, 1 + 2 = 3, and 3 is really the mission. And if you can keep a focus on the mission, whatever that is for your organization, it just kind of, and I use that literally, if I was sitting at my desk in the Pentagon, I get a little yellow sticky that sits under my computer, and it says 1 + 2 = 3. And every morning I kind of check in, okay, to take care of myself. Am I doing the things I need to do? Where's my team? I haven't heard from Joe or Susie or Sally. I need to go, make sure they're okay. And then what's my customer think of our mission? Keeping it simple in times of crisis is really important. And keeping, an ability to do small things. If you're following me on LinkedIn, you see I put a music post every morning. Folks are looking for, I love music, I love leadership, so I can talk to both of those. But folks on the teams, when everything is very dynamic, they really will cling to things that are constant and they can rely on them. And as a leader, you've got to be a person that they can feel is there for them and rely on them. And so, over the year, I had to learn that the hard way. A lot of times I wasn't doing that and it was not as successful. And so, 30 plus years of scar tissue has taught me some of those.
Well, I really like, there's a lot there to unpack. So I think if you're open to it, we'll dive a little bit into that. Yeah. In particular, I liked how you outlined how we are always in learning mode as leaders and providing to our teams as we adapt and provide adaptive leadership to them. So you opened with 4 things. You talked about making sure you have empathy for your team, then from there, making sure you have speed and velocity, and then thinking about from there how we also at the same time make sure we focus on outputs, and ultimately from the outputs then where we spend our time. Let's go first and let's talk about digital empathy, because I think you've had a really great point there, which is you need to make sure that you have empathy to make sure that the team's talents are best being used. And I guess tell me a little bit more when you parachute in a role, how do you make sense of what the team's talents are? Tell me more about that, please.
Yeah, in a couple of things, you've got to first understand yourself. And I find a lot of leaders don't take the time to understand themselves, myself, and we change. Some things change over time, some don't. First time, if I ran in Israel, right, big organization, 130,000 people, $148 billion a year enterprise, and here you have this Air Force turned special ops guy now in charge of building ships and submarines and whatnot. And many leaders wait for the organization to discover their strengths and weaknesses, their behaviors and whatnot. As opposed to the first thing I did when I showed up is I said, here's the gouge sheet. Here's a 1 page on me. Here's what I like. Here's what I get frustrated by. Here's where I have my own blind spots. Here's what I expect out of you, and handed that to everybody in the organization. So rather than take the 90 days for everybody to discover that, kind of create that. The second piece, I'm a huge, I'm intent based. And I live by try and live by that servant leadership model. Mm-hmm. Simple things can send that message very quickly. Any org chart I'm on, you'll see me at the bottom of any org chart, right? Because I believe as a leader, your job is to enable your direct reports. Their job is to enable their teams. Their team's job is to deliver for the customer. So, starting from the front end of, hey, my job as a leader is to serve the organization, not the organization to serve me. Because as you get, anybody on the line here gets further and further up the chain, everything works against that principle. Mm-hmm. You get, whatever it is, you get resources, you get things to help facilitate it. And you've got to constantly fight that impacting kind of your perspective on the organization. Because ultimately, great leaders understand how to unlock that discretionary output from a team. And we've all been on those good teams where, you don't have to ask for the holiday party. People volunteer and it happens. You don't have to ask for somebody to pitch in to solve a problem. So how do you unlock that discretionary output from your team? Now that's about empowerment and inspiration and creating the behaviors to leverage everybody's unique skills. Again, easy to say here in a webinar. It's 100,000 little small things every day, and every one you get wrong, you get a 10x. You got to do 9 more to make up for it. But as a leader, if you're caught, that's where I kind of said you can't get caught in the work. You need to understand the work. You have to have empathy for the work. You can't. You need to be informed. But if you're way down in the chain, then nobody's doing the things only you can do at a leader. And what I find in crisis, that becomes even more important. Because there's only, if you're the leader of an organization, only you can really provide that, what folks are looking for, particularly in a crisis. And again, crisis, there's downside to it. There's huge opportunities. The Department of the Navy, right? Over the last year, we if I measure how much we put on contract as an output, we increased output by 21%. So we awarded 21% more contracts. We did it with 10% less contracting actions, and we broke every record in small business. So, you could say COVID's been a tremendously impactful and and damaging things. But it does shake up the middle layer. And for the leaders that can understand that opportunity and have built all of the sets and reps to leverage it, you can. But again, if you don't get that first step right, empathy, empowerment, inspiration, value, diversity, it's really hard to get steps 2, 3, 4, and 5 right.
Very well said. And I almost, as I was listening to you, it's like you're playing the role of building Camelot. You're convening the round table, and you're making sure it truly is a round table where everyone's around. And from there, like you said, then you get people that are self-motivated to serve the mission and do the right thing, as opposed to you having to direct them.
Yeah,
so that gets to the next question that I had, which is the second point you were talking about was having speed and velocity, but making sure it was in the right place. And I know you're a fan of both velocity and agility. So maybe if you could talk to us a little bit more about how does velocity and agility tie into the role of what an organization and what teams need to do?
Yeah, great question. I do like the term agility much more than the term innovation. I think innovation gets it becomes everything to everybody. Agility to me is really your pivot speed, your adaptability, your ability to modify your plan quickly. And the one thing I really learned from my time at Special Operations is that you can actually build up an ability to be agile and adaptable without knowing in what direction you need to be agile and adaptable. And so a little bit of you can plan for the unplanned, you can do it. And what I also learned there is you can't wait till you're in the crisis to get good at doing it, because that's really hard. And so, you can get in sets and reps and start building the skill while you have the time to absorb the inefficiency of that learning. And so it's interesting, in the Navy 3 years ago when I got here, we didn't have a good wartime plan on the acquisition side. We didn't have, how are we going to scale operations? How are we going to be able to pivot quickly in a wartime mode? We were very focused on being hyper efficient in a peacetime mode on the acquisition side. And so we started getting after that. We built sets and reps, we built teams, we built behaviors, we built tools. The reason I think the Navy was able to pivot so quickly in COVID, we hadn't been figuring out how we were going to act in COVID to get more efficient. We had been figuring out how to do all those other things that we just adapted in the COVID world. And I guess maybe to tie to my kind of opening comment, two maybe key features there are decentralization and differentiation. And so you've got to figure out, I think, to get the speed of the entire organization in velocity, right? Speed in the right direction. You've got to be able to decentralize, and I'll say to the lowest and I'll underline capable level. So that also implies training and leader development and all those things. But get the work into the place where the work can get done the most efficiently. But differentiate the work. Don't try and do it by a one-size-fits-all tool that applies. Again, Navy is a huge organization. We should not have just one process to go procure something or develop something. Because if I'm trying to get the latest AI algorithm, at the same time I'm building a nuclear power plant, there's no reason to think we should have the same process, attitude, skills, oversight to do those jobs the same. But bureaucracies love to try and come up with one way to do everything, because that simplifies complex solutions. So what I found is if you can decentralize the work, so folks work on intent, they're inspired, empowered, and valued, and then you can differentiate the work and create lots of different tools that then they can choose, then you can hold accountable those folks to pick the right tool for the right job to deliver the right outcome. And that's, I think, some of how we've been able to leverage, velocity and agility in an organization, of this size. But it takes, I guess, finally, it takes a strong foundation. And so if you're gonna pivot hard, if you think of it as like a fulcrum, the strength of your fulcrum will really drive how much pivot speed you can get, or pivot mass that you can generate. And so that's, as a leader, you've got to be developing that strong foundation from which to pivot for. If you don't have that, you'll pivot, but you'll be pivoting on a weak base.
Makes absolute sense. And I liked how you sort of highlighted that it really is about making sure you decentralize and distribute as much as possible the ability for people to then have a set of steps or tools that they can use in their tool belt to respond to whatever happens. And that allows you to have sort of the emergent, almost resilient outcomes as a result of that. So in some respects, you are prepared for the unexpected in some respects. So that's a good segue to, you've done a lot over the last few years, and you were talking about the importance of outputs and focusing on outputs. I was wondering if maybe you could share a little bit about what have been some of the outputs that you sort of are the most proud of, and the things that you're most seeing as success with the teams that you've helped lead?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I measure, my success in the eyes of sailors and Marines around the world. And so ultimately, there's a whole bunch of things that support them, but ultimately, that's certainly where I measure output. And bureaucracies, we hear user-centered design, you hear customer-based organization. Bureaucracies love to value the process and not the output. Mm-hmm. And we had to transform ourselves, particularly in a very statutory heavy, many stakeholder enterprise like, procurement of, multi-billion dollar ships for the right reasons. There's lots of people involved. And sometimes we can get to the point where we overvalue compliance to the process without an eye towards output. I mean, process is great and process adherence can help you with an output, but if it isn't delivering an output, that's really, I think, problematic, because then all the wrong behaviors start getting emphasized and incentivized. And so I would say, a very proud moment for us has really been how we've been able to become more multidextrous and create the conditions where we can get faster at the things that need to go fast, while still deliver the things that need to be delivered with low risk margin for failure, and deliver those effectively, and create the culture where both sides are respected. And that's a really large challenge, I think, for a leader in very large organizations. And being able to, again, back to that differentiating, think about the AI algorithm that's on a sonar system on a submarine differently than thinking about the nuclear power plant that's on the submarine. And so, in that instance, we've been able to get to 18-month software refresh rates, 3-year compute refresh rates, while still, being very deliberate on the outside of the submarine, and getting to a point where we can think about what's wet and what's dry differently. That's hard for a bureaucracy to do at scale. And then create, I would say, organizations are like a big piece of plastic. You can get some, you can get a fired up leader in there, and he can apply, or she can apply, a lot of management heat, and that organization will bend. But as soon as that goes away, that organization will snap right back. So we've really been focused at changing at the molecular level, because that's really the only way you can get there. And I'm seeing it every day. The ability for us to pivot and get 20% more output with 10% less work, at 95% telework from less than 5% telework, and break every small business record in 9 months is pretty phenomenal. Particularly with all the stresses on, all the human stresses that we're all dealing with, because that makes a real difference to those sailors and Marines. And that's where I'm starting to see it. Our ability to create this network to bring in new performers, like small businesses, like startups, and create the right connective tissue. Again, we got a long way to go, but we've got vectors in the right way, and we're starting to scale. And that's and folks are, again, back to that molecular thing, they're not doing it to be compliant. They feel empowered to make those positive changes because they see the output. And particularly, in large organizations, I think that's, if you can kind of unlock that, then I think you're starting to get where you need to go.
Right, exactly. And I like your idea of it really is about change at the molecular level. It's about making sure everyone recognizes that they themselves can be a positive change agent. It's not dependent on just the force of one or a few, but they actually are part of the solution, and they shift from being problem holders or sometimes problem admirers to being problem solvers at the edge.
Yeah, Dan, if I think one thing that we had to, one fundamental change we really valued individual innovation and individual expertise. We didn't value as much taking what somebody else had done and taking it to the next level. And it was just not the nature. It's part of its culture in the military and whatnot. And I talk about velocity of learning. Part of that was getting a culture where start from wherever somebody in your organization's already got to. Don't spend your time getting to where they took 3 years to get to. I think that is, I've learned to appreciate even more this learning velocity as a true enduring competitive advantage. And that's, again, breaking it across an organization that builds everything from the seabed to space. But we've been able, I think, for the first time to take what somebody tried in a submarine program and use that to improve how we build an airplane. That's really exciting because now if you're going to scale to an organizational level, it's really about that learning velocity. And to get there, it takes a whole bunch of, again, predecessor events. But back to what I'm proud of, I'm starting to, really see that take hold and people valued for the idea, not where it came from.
Very well said. And I think that's a good, always be learning, and learning velocity gets to the last sort of the 4 points that you had said, which is where do you spend your time? And it sounds like you should be really spending your time not just on the things that need to be focused on outputs, but also making sure it's not necessarily reinventing the wheel if the wheel has already been useful or useful across an organization. So I guess I'd be interested in your thoughts about how do you help the team know where to focus? How do you signal to them where they should be spending their time? How do you signal what's important versus things that they can actually move on and not spend as much time on?
Yeah, I think some of it is, it's kind of twofold. You've got to, maybe we'll get to it at the end or I'll work it in. The two traits I think are really powerful are boldness and humility. And it's an interesting because people see those sometimes as diametrically opposed. I think they're actually both enabling. But I think what we've been trying to do is create kind of in this multi-dexterous organization the senior leadership to spend more time thinking about intent and creating the culture where we are much more able to value opportunities no matter where it comes from, particularly if it comes from below somewhere in the organization, and being able to leverage those quickly. So one of it is, okay, what's important to the Navy from an intent standpoint? How are we going to compete? And what does competition look like? And so, I kind of have a 3-step process I think we're trying to go through. The first is a little bit of vision of possible futures. And I put futures in parentheses. And in really high performing organizations, the leadership spends a lot of time trying to vision what the future or futures might look like. And again, I caution, don't try and pick one because you'll be wrong.
Right.
I just don't want to be, I won't be right, but I don't want to be really wrong. And then if you can do that, then start focusing on building scalable platforms. And again, platforms isn't like a ship platform, but whether it's a development strategy or a talent platform or what are the things you're going to do to enable you to scale quickly? And then third, really value bold and relentless experimentation. And so rather than say, hey, we're going to focus on AI or we're going to focus on machine learning or we're going to focus on this, there are certainly those things that we're going to focus on, but it's more that how do we create that kind of that kind of underlying, hey, we always need to be thinking forward. We always need to be thinking about anything we can do. How do we seize the opportunity to scale fast? And then how do we check our assumptions all the time to make sure we've got the right velocity, we're not speeding off into the wrong direction. That kind of very iterative cycle, one of the things we stood up in the Navy is we have an R&D board, a research and development board, because what I noticed on the front end is the senior leadership wasn't spending enough time thinking about what's really important from hard operational problems that we want the tech base to solve. We were kind of either solving problems we already knew or thinking maybe we'd get a random discovery. And so myself, the Vice Chief of Naval Operations and the Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps now meet regularly with our entire R&D enterprise to say, hey, we want to hear from you. what are you doing? What's important? What are the sensors? What are the signals? What are the data analytics showing? And then what are we hearing or from all of our exposure? What do we think is going to be important to the way we're going to operate in the future? That strategic level board had not existed, at least in the time I had been there. And that's really helping then that two-way dialogue of, well, here's where I think we need to go. Well, here's some options of where you might go. Oh, I didn't know I could go there, or I didn't know you wanted to go there, and kind of drive that together. And that's really starting to pay, I think, some strategic benefits, because then with the right culture, they'll take that intent and then go turn that into action.
Excellent. And I can definitely see, I mean, one, I really like how you brought those different groups together to have those shared conversations, but I can also see how your past experiences with the Air Force, I'm thinking of the OODA loop, it's the Orient, Observe, Decide, Act. I mean, you are definitely trying to accelerate your OODA loop here. So given that at the Geotech Center, we are tracking how the rate of exquisite technologies are increasingly becoming available to the commercial sector and to consumers, and that this has impacts both in terms of how societies operate, geopolitics, and of course also national security. If you're open to it, I'd be interested in your thoughts on some specific technologies, possibly starting first with the increasing commercialization of space and what space can do commercially. How does that then impact how the Navy and in general, how defense operates?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting to watch how that goes. And one of the things I think about are learning from different elements. It is somewhat interesting. I think we still have had more people land on the moon and stand on the moon than have been to the deepest depth of the ocean on our own planet.
Right.
And so I would say two things. I think that exploration and curiosity and leveraging those new opportunities in space are very impactful, and it's going to change our relationship in the way we think of space from kind of pure military or large government mega project thing to many more opportunities for folks to do many more exciting things, and particularly if we can start linking the data products and all the commercial things. We've got to change our way we think about the services that are available from space and the way we access and partner with folks to get those services. So I think that's 10 or 20 years ago, you would have been hard pressed to find folks to think we could have done what's happening right now in space without a big government mega project. And so it's really fascinating to watch both what's happening and how it's happening, and then how do we leverage that. I link back to undersea is, to me, the undersea seems like space in the 1960s.
Right.
It's still, largely, I think 90% of the ocean hasn't been explored at anything. So we have, if 70% of the world's ocean, 90%, 63% or something of our planet hasn't been explored as we think about exploring other planets. And so I think there's we should learn from what's happened in space, and similarly think about the opportunities in the undersea piece. And then for your Navy, who operates, again, from seabed to space, then we've got to think about how do we operate across that entire spectrum? How do we partner with, enable, collaborate with, entities that operate in all of those different elements, and then by doing so, create a competitive advantage for us, protect those things that are powerful for democracy on the sea, and then dissuade our competitors. Most folks probably know 90% of our global merchandise travels on the water. They probably don't know 99% of the internet travels underwater.
Right.
And so, to some degree, the cloud is actually underwater. And so it's, as your nation's Navy, it's really important that we enable that, because if that gets cut off and we don't have free trade and we don't have free information flow, that has huge implications for us, as a nation and as a society, and as a world. And so, again, there's a lot of interesting similarities. The really powerful folks will figure out how to get those all playing together strategically, so we don't look at them individually.
Very well said. And actually, as fate would have it, just yesterday, we were having a closed door Chatham House conversation about what we could learn from space to inform undersea. So I'm really glad you set the stage with that way. And my own personal experiences, I was back in 1993, I got an opportunity to work with Dr. Robert Ballard and the U.S. Navy in the Sea of Cortez. And so it's near and dear to my heart because I still feel like, exactly as you said, we haven't explored the ocean as much as we should, and there's just so much there. And it may very well be that some of the advances that are done in space and surviving in those very challenging environments, but also some of the imagery that comes back from space, that we may actually be able to have some interesting identification of resources. Two things to think about if we could dive a little bit deeper on space. One of the conversations that actually did come out of the conversation yesterday is a recognition that for unmanned vehicles, be they either on the surface of the ocean or under the ocean, right now, if they're not piloted by a human, then they're considered abandoned. And one of the predictions we have here at the Geotech Center is that by 2030, it could very well be, when you talked about those commercial traffic on the seas that are part of the supply chains, 80% or more by 2030 of those vessels may actually be unmanned. So I guess, how do you think, how can Navy begin to address a future that may change such that 5 and even 10 years from now may look dramatically different in how commercial shipping is done and how the Navy needs to be able to do its job?
Yeah, again, I think there's great opportunity there. I was, at Special Operations Command, kind of on the front end of the unmanned aviation thing, and so maybe a couple thoughts. One, we need to be a little careful calling it unmanned. It's more remotely piloted, or
there you go. Yes.
So, and the reason I say that is because there are huge implications on how do you deal with all the manpower piece of that. How do you organize? How do you command and control all of those assets and whatnot? And I think the interesting thing in the remotely piloted or unmanned world is it's not as huge a technology issue as a concept of operations issue. And how do you take the laws of the sea for hundreds and hundreds of years built under one set of circumstances, think about them in this circumstances? How do we think about them as a Navy? And then I think the other interesting thing is we talk a lot about industrial base. If I talk about industrial base in shipbuilding, everybody thinks of shipyards. There's going to be new industrial bases in autonomy and autonomous algorithms and in detection and all these other things. And so, why do I say all that? I think we're trying now, kind of with the Navy having a unmanned campaign plan. Unmanned everybody will focus on the platform, and it's going to be so much more, and it will take much more to enable it. But I think, like aviation, it will seem harder than it appears at the front, and then it will scale much faster than we think on the back end of it. And so we don't want to be caught short, still thinking about it when somebody else is scaling it. Whether that's commercially or whether that's with one of our competitors. So again, I think there are large opportunities here. We're going after it. The last element is to do it. We'll get a little bit platform centric. It's going to require a really robust, reliant, and resilient network. Particularly if you think about operating thousands of ships over the Pacific Ocean. It's not like we have cell towers every 100 feet that you do in an autonomous driving kind of situation. And so it'll be more than just the platforms that we've got to solve. But we're certainly viewing that and trying to get after it in all of its dimensions.
Very well said. And you went to where I was going to go next. And so maybe we can touch a little bit deeper on terms of thinking about advances in data and how data increasingly is, one, you do need that robust infrastructure to be able to handle it and the capacity to be able to handle it. But then it's also making sense of it at speed. And so we need increasingly processing at the edge. And so I wonder if you're seeing trends in terms of R&D there, or things that you can share about how do we make things more edge-centric and data-centric for operations?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, we've got a thing called program overmatch. It's somewhat patterned after the wicked problem we had to launch a ballistic missile out of a submarine. And so, Navy has kind of put a dedicated team at trying to get this solved from an outcome-based issue. There's lots of piece parts. There's lots of enabling technology out there that we've got to get after. I would also, observe and kind of back to my SOCOM days. Sometimes we don't need the most exotic technology, just the most useful.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a huge amount of opportunity for improved IT, improved data management, improved use of AI for things that folks aren't maybe necessarily thinking about. We spend over $10 billion a year maintaining ships. We largely do that the way we've done it for a long time. There's a lot of existing technologies out there in the software and AI world to help us decide what we need to maintain better. And then, I would say readily available commercial technologies to adapt. So part of what we're also trying to do is, I would say the same for training. And so there are lots of use cases right now for state of the current world technologies, but applying them to old problems we've had for a long time, which demand a lot of resources. And so we're trying to work on both ends of it. What is the really hard, complex problem that we can take, state of the art or drive state of the art technologies to solve? And then where are there emerging technologies that could help with problems we have today, old problems we've always had in a new way?
Really well said, and I particularly like your line that it's not so much about the exquisite or exotic technology; it's about the one that's the most useful. And I think that's something we should all keep in mind as we embrace the future. Going off the ideas about how data is going to be so important, and also recognizing some things that we may see in the future. If there was a nation state or an adversary that wanted to try and disrupt our data or disrupt what we made sense of data in a battlefield situation or a conflict situation, how do we address some of these challenges when it relates to whether it's misinformation or cyber when it comes to a battlefield context here?
Yeah, I think one of the side challenges and opportunity with COVID is it reminded us the absolute need and value of resiliency and robustness. And when you're in a peacetime situation, you can sometimes overvalue hyper efficiency, and then underestimate the fragility that you've built into the system to become hyper efficient. And all it takes is a snowstorm like outside my window a week before Christmas, when everybody's trying to get their packages delivered, that can bring that to light. Cyber, even just outages, much less direct action, can be very, very impactful if you don't think about it. You don't create that resilience kind of as a core value, not as an afterthought. And so, what we're finding, I think, with COVID on supply chains, what we're finding with some of the cyber activities that are going on right now is we've got to constantly check our assumptions in terms of robustness and adaptability and resilience, and not trade those away for cost as early as we've done in many of the programs we've done. Now we've got to improve the way we develop products and services, so we don't pay 10 times the product development costs after the fact to make it cyberproof,
right,
and build those into the development process. So I think a lot of the opportunities we have in using modern software development techniques, into using new hardware architectures, zero trust kind of mentalities, is we can get away from trying to inspect in after the fact and build from the ground up the attributes that are of value. And you're starting to see that transition occur. I think that will be really critical because it's unaffordable for us to continue under the develop it the old way and then send it through a 3-year RMF process as your way to do cyber. If we do not get, there is some resilience in speed and pivot speed. And if your cycle times are so long, that if you're not careful, that also creates vulnerabilities. If your cost to upgrade something is so expensive you can't, that creates vulnerabilities. So both that, how do we bake it in from the start, and then how do we really get our iteration speed up? Well, I think give us the resilience we are really going to need if we're going to be effective competing in the future.
Very well said, and then you went exactly where I was going to go next too, which is it is about, like you said, making sure we bake things into the process while we're developing them, as opposed to after it gets developed, putting a bolt on and trying to wait for however long that takes. Recognizing that we have to have trust in computer chips and what hardware does, but also thinking about trust in terms of what AI does and how we can bake that in. You hinted a little bit, so maybe we've already addressed it, but are there other things that can be done to increase the cycle speed, but also increase how the workforce can have trust that that piece of hardware, that chip, or that AI algorithm really is going to be something that's going to be doing what we think it should be doing when the actual stuff hits the fan?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a range of both technology and procedural ways to get after it. And I think to some degree, some of these technologies can help mitigate some of the other technologies. So using AI algorithms to sense a cyber attack or vulnerability, using new machine learning as a way to speed up how fast you can cycle through all the software code, using new software code development cycles. So I think some of this starts to play together, and we've got to not treat each one of those kind of individually, but think of them in new ways. And what's really interesting is, again, I'm a bureaucracies tend to try and manage downside risk and not leverage upside opportunity. For your Navy, it's been fairly remarkable that we have not slowed down. In fact, our operations are at an all-time high. We've never shut down a shipyard, private or public, for a day during COVID. So we've kept major industrial operations up and running. We're keeping our ops temp up. It showed us, one, the resiliency of all the whether it's sailors or shipbuilders or Marines. People are fairly resilient, and more so sometimes than we give them credit for. But it's also taught us new ways to get after old problems and make ships more self-reliant, because we can now use remote tools to connect to them and train them on the spot, or make them more self-sufficient, because now we can remotely do maintenance support for them versus flying, a field service rep out. And so some of the challenges of the current environment are, back to my, plan for the unplanned, leveraging this ability to operate differently, get our sets and reps in, learn what's working, what's not working, where do we have to improve. Because in my mind, success for us is not going back to where we were a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
That's failure. If we go back to where we were with very fragile technology change, very fragile systems, not having the resilience we had needed baked in. So, our focus now is taking all of the hard lessons we've learned from the terrible challenges of COVID and how we've continued to operate through that, and apply those to the future to build in that. That's our new foundation. That's our new starting point. That's our new view of what resilience really means. And so I think from that, we are a stronger force than we were 9 months ago. And I think it's pointing us again. We've got to scale it and make sure we can sustain it, but it's put us on the right vector.
Very impressive, and it's amazing what you've done, both when COVID-19 happened, but I recall seeing what you were doing in 2018 and 2019 to sort of, like you said, lay the foundation so that when this crisis did happen, you could actually have that team and the team of teams to be able to move forward.
Yeah, maybe, David, if I can go back to my first point
Sure.
On that, as a leader, I'm going to tie it a little bit back to, again, if you're caught in the work, I try and stay about 5 years ahead of the organization. Mm-hmm. Because what I found is if you can change an organization, you can change it maybe 15 to 20% at a time without putting it into crisis mode. And so if you can live 4 or 5 years ahead as a leader of the organization and then be constantly shaping it, you can start to create the capacity you need before the call comes to use it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important for leaders, because it's so, with all the IT and email and instant everything, it's so easy to get dragged down into the day-to-day. And if you're in the day-to-day, nobody is shaping the 5 years from now. Again, some of it was just coincidence, but things we started 2 and 3 years ago put us in this place, even if we didn't recognize it at the time. But that wouldn't have been possible if the entire leadership team was 18 tiers down, micro checking everything.
Well said, and there's definitely something to be said about not getting caught up in the tyranny of the now, that can pull us down. And like you said, we have to be, in some respects, leaders have to dissociate both their bodies, but their minds to think about the future so they can prepare the organization. And like you said, it's placing different bets and experiments. We're never going to be perfectly right, but we can have that pivot speed so that when things do actually occur, we've already got the organization ready for that. Which gets to another question I would say. So we've talked a lot about the tech, the people side and the talent side. How do you both attract talent? How do you retain talent? How do you reward talent? I'd be interested in your philosophy about how do you embrace the people side and encourage people to do both experiments and also be problem solvers of their own.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit on both what do we value, and then how do we create the conditions to bring everybody in. So valuing ability to learn. Again, I'm not that smart. I'm a hell of a poacher. Right? Creating great relationships. Everybody on this net here is learning from each other, and being and valuing that and taking that, so we can kind of get the network speed. I think is it's interesting. The number one performance item I have on all my direct reports is they've got to have a major initiative that's got at least a 50% chance of failing.
Hmm.
And teaching the organization, again, it's not that I want to fail a lot, it's that I want to learn fast.
Right.
If you're not willing to fail at some things, now again, judgment's authorized and encouraged. And so you're like, let's not pick law, or let's not pick, ethics, or let's not pick safety as the thing we want to experiment in. But you've got to build that kind of connective tissue and kind of just get sets and reps in. If you're going to go bench 500 pounds, you don't start by benching 500 pounds.
Sure.
And so I think that's a really important piece. And then you'll develop the talent and the skills within that talent base to get good at thinking about things differently. The second piece is create the culture that really values diversity in all of its dimensions, whether that's who you are, race, gender, how you think, who do you know, what are your skills, and in this application, who do you team with? And again, very proud of the fact that we're amongst all this, we didn't break kind of all of our records by teaming with the same people we've always teamed with. We did it by expanding the number of people we team with. We've got initiatives, kind of tech bridges, where we're building these kind of ability, ease the burden for folks across wider diversity elements to get together. So if you can both kind of create the right mindset and outward kind of focus, and then create the tools and processes to get there, then I think you have a chance at it. Again, great teams who compete leverage everybody on the team. All-star teams don't generally win. The team that can leverage all the talents they have and grow those talents are the sustainable, winning teams. That's at least the way we're trying to approach it.
I really like that, especially the emphasis on learning and growing and cultivating. And I often tell people that the word fail is really an acronym for first attempt at iterative learning, which I think embodies what you're saying there as well. So on the other side about talent, there's also, are there ways that we need to recognize in this new world in which we're connected and the impacts of COVID-19, but then beyond, like you said, are there ways that the public can become more engaged or participatory without necessarily joining the military? I mean, obviously we want that. We want people to join the reserves, military, civilian service, but are other ways that people can be involved with sort of the efforts that you're doing to actually help do the work of defense, even if they're in a purely public capacity?
Yeah, one of the things I started at SOCOM was a thing called SoftWorks. We've adapted that now and scaling it in Navy with, if you haven't heard about naval X or tech bridges. And part of my worry was, as the percentage of the population who's got military experience or military in their families, that's gotten smaller and smaller. There's a greater percentage of the population that isn't familiar with the military, doesn't want to help. I'm sure if I ask anybody in the street, hey, would you like to help in the military? They say, sure, but don't know how to. And if they have a great idea, they don't know how to get to us. So part of what we're trying to do is increase our surface area, because the thing, again, that keeps me up at night, and I said the same thing at SOCOM, was a good idea that can't get to the right person to action it, because it gets lost in the bureaucracy, or if you're if you're in, take ship repair. You can have a great idea on ship repair. It could be an autonomous robot to go look at our ballast tanks that we have to clean out. But if you're the robot builder of that, to get to the person who thinks about ballast tanks it might be 3,000 physical miles. It could be 500,000 cultural miles. Mm-hmm. And if you're a small startup, you don't have the time to go figure all that out. And so really what we're trying to do now is, make it as fast and efficient as possible to get an idea to the right person to talk to them about, and then create the culture where it's valued no matter where it comes from. That's what we're after. We're starting to scale it. We call these things tech bridges, areas where we bring state, local, academic, fleet and acquisition research all together. We've got 15 of those spanning from Hawaii right now to London, to try and get that surface area up and then connect that through a network so we can really pursue, I would say, agility at network speed, not, I know David knows Susan, but as soon as David and Susan both leave, it falls apart. That's where we've struggled in the past, what we're trying to overcome.
Really well said, and I like the fact that, like you said, you're looking for something that's long-term, that's systemic, that is not just personality-based, but it actually is at the molecular level, as you said before. So as a slight pivot, as we get towards the close, I would be interested if you'd be willing to share any thoughts as to trends that are happening in the world. They could be trends that are happening in terms of R&D, but also trends that are happening in just how the world is changing that either keep you up at night or give you hope as we look towards 2021. Are there any trends in particular that you'd like to call out?
So I think, the trend towards leveraging everybody, not just the folks that you've always worked with, I think is important. I think COVID has helped us get a little bit, shaken out of status quo. And so I think that's an important one. I think this idea of being able to operate across multiple media, whether you're on the seabed, on the surface of the sea or in space, I think is important. I think we've got to get to resilient and trustworthy systems and data and information. And, we're seeing the challenges of that by actors who are trying to create some, confusion in the observe part of the OODA loop, and then, try and disrupt it from that standpoint. So I think that's something we've got to keep an eye on. And then, over the last 9 months, I've really seen a greater, I think, willingness on both parties, both high tech and government, to figure out ways to work together, because neither can afford to live in their own silo. And 3 or 4 years ago, there was a little bit of a sense that there's no way we can work together, so we're going to just ignore each other and go in our own corners. We're not going to survive as a nation, as a democracy, if we don't figure out how to leverage appropriately with all the right safeguards and transparency, both sides of that equation. And over the last 9 months, I'm seeing on both sides, in fairness, people looking for new ways to get together for the right reasons, and that gives me a lot of hope. Young folks coming up, I tell everybody else, we talk about, is this generation the greatest generation or that generation? I would, the part that's hardest for me is I wish I could bottle up every sailor and Marine that's out there and show folks who don't have an exposure to them. And so that's part of what we've got to do as a military is, they're out there every day. You imagine being on a submarine for a number of months while your family's back at home dealing with COVID without you. And they're still out there getting after it. They're not losing focus. You can be on a destroyer in the China Sea doing, out there on your own, and they're out there getting it. So, they are representing our country well. We've got to make sure we're leveraging every asset we have to support them around the globe.
Very well said, and I particularly like one, like your call out is there are amazing individuals out there, everyone at the Navy that is doing their jobs, they're doing their duty, and they're doing the service to the nation, with focus amidst everything else that's happening and all the distractions, which is really commendable. And also, like you said, that 5 or 6 years ago, we saw this rift between the tech community and the government communities. And now there may be an opportunity that we recognize that phrase from 1776, which is we either all hang separately or we hang together. And I think that's really what we really want to embrace here. And I think that's what we're trying to champion here at the Geotech Center, which gets me to right before the lightning round. You had said a little bit earlier about the ideas of boldness and humility. If you could maybe just give us a real quick, maybe 1 minute answer as to why you see boldness and humility need to be brought to better, and then we'll go to the lightning round after that.
All right. Well, I'm going to say my three phrase for the lightning round, but bold humility to me is every great leader I've had a chance to serve with, learn from, aspire to, seem to have those traits. They were really interested in learning, and they would learn from anyone, but they didn't wait for perfect to act. And they inspired folks because they asked good questions. They didn't come with a preconceived answer. They weren't directive. They were inquisitive. And I think particularly with the speed of technology, you cannot be the expert on everything, no matter, so the idea of the 10,000 repetition cycles and all that gets really hard when everything is changing on 6-month centers or 8-month centers or 9-month centers. And so that I think it's really important that we don't confuse humility for hesitancy, but we don't confuse boldness for arrogance as we go forward here. And if you can remember that as a leader, and it's hard, and you're tested every day, but when I've been able to do that, I've been much more successful than when I haven't done that.
Very well said. And like you said, we're tested every day. It's part of the forging process that makes leaders. So now for the final close, I would be interested in, as the lightning round, your 3 takeaways or recommendations you have for leaders of all sectors for how we embrace 2021 onwards.
So again, a little 3-part formula. Have the curiosity to discover, the humility to learn, and the boldness to act. And I think leaders that have those 3 traits, and none of us have them, and we're not super ninjas in all 3. And so if you don't have them, find folks on your team to do that. But if you can do that, curiosity, humility, and boldness, if you can do those 3 things in a way that's meaningful for your mission objective, if we all do that together, then 2021 can be the year we pivoted out of a really tough 2020.
Well, thank you for that, Secretary Gertz. You are an amazing, inspirational leader. Thank you for everything that you've been doing throughout your career and joining us here at the Geotech Hour. We really appreciate the recommendations you shared here. For all our listeners, thank you for joining us throughout all of 2020. We'll join again starting on January 6th of 2021 for the next Geotech Hour. But as always, as we tell everyone, thank you for what you're doing as positive change agents. Be bold, be brave, and be benevolent. Thank you all.
All right. Thank you, David.
Thank you.